welcome to the 16th Annual Sonia Osborne Museum Studies Symposium. And thank you all so much for being here. I know that some of you don't have a choice, but we really appreciate you being in our audience or online. So as many of you know, this program was created in honor of the passion and commitment of my predecessor, Sonia Osborne, and the many students that she inspired through her study of art history with them in her 20 years at Westover. So in honoring Sonia, we set out to create a program that would provide students with a comprehensive work-study internship at Hillstead Museum to learn art historical scholarship through research projects and to bring and share all of that knowledge and research back with our community. So students in this internship experience, they travel to Hillstead once a week. They work with curators, they collaborate with our amazing archivists, and Rich and Nancy are in our audience tonight to support Catherine with the work that they did. And they work with them to learn about the connection between Westover and Hillstead. And then they select a work from Hillstead's collection to develop into a symposium paper. So this semester, Catherine spent a total of 38.5 hours in the museum. And in that time, she explored Westover's connection with Hillstead in our archives and at the museum through a project that she worked on that she'll share with you. And she selected a work from Hillstead's collection to develop into the paper that you'll hear tonight. And further, she also then realized that argument in an exhibition project that's on display in the gallery, which some of you hopefully saw as you were enjoying your brownies. That sort of brings to life the academic argument that she'll share with you tonight. So Catherine will be informally sharing a bit about her experiences at Hillstead in the archives and about her art installation before she shares her symposium paper. And then after she shares her argument with you, she'll have a moment for questions, so keep your curiosity going and be sure to ask her because she's the authority on the subject. And then after that, she'll be able to offer some thanks to some community members who made this experience possible for her. And so I would like to also do that for a moment right now to acknowledge everybody in this community that makes this experience possible for our students each year, including those individuals at Westover who show up at the symposium every year for us, as well as Nancy and Rich in the archives who basically co-teach this internship experience with the students and help support their learning in that space. And I also want to acknowledge Melanie Anderson-Borbeau at Hillstead, who's stewarded every one of our SOMSI interns over the past 16 years. She always finds projects to align with their interests. I just learned from some of our members of the audience that she writes recommendation letters on behalf of alumna. So she's a very dedicated member of our Westover family. I'm really appreciative that she's helped partner with me in creating this program. So I also want to thank all of you for being here, as well as our special audience members, which includes Ella and Julianne, who are the former SOMSI alum, as well as Alexis, who is also here, who's also a former SOMSI alum. And so we also have a huge community of people here to support this program tonight. And so it means a lot to see you all in the audience and to come out and support our students. I email the alumni every year to support our students, and not only do they show up in email, they show up in person and online. So thank you in all those ways that they come out for Westover. I also want to thank the Tortoriello family for providing the funding in the first place for this program to happen. SOMSI wouldn't be here without them. So now for Catherine. Every student in the SOMSI program rises to the challenge of an invested research and writing experience, and Catherine did so this year by really following her heart. So for Catherine, that meant the way she continued to find connections between Westover and Asian countries, whether in discovering in our archives Chinese artwork or past speakers who came to Westover, noting in the 3 books she read, Hillstead and Westover moments of the Pope's family's travels to China, or Mary Hillard's support of missionaries in China, or her discovery of Chinese photo albums in Hillstead's collection. So when Catherine came to me after her first several visits to Hillstead set on selecting Monet for her final project, we paused and considered what themes really stood out to her through her reflections and her wonderings of the readings that she'd been doing and sort of what she'd been thinking about. And what we realized that stayed with her were the Chinese photo albums that she discovered in Hillstead's collection, as well as the way that Theodate wrote about her travels to China. And she had really conflicted feelings about this. This was not an easy subject to take on. But once she decided that this topic was what was staying with her, what was weighing with her, she never looked back. And in addition to taking on that challenging subject matter, she also rose to the challenge of this internship by presenting to the 9th grade class at Hillstead or standing before you tonight reading her paper. So she's risen to this challenge through her ability to self-reflect, to hold oppositional truths together, to advocate for what she needs, to communicate, and to work in a space that really matters to her. So I feel privileged every year to learn from and with my students, and I hope that Catherine, you feel proud of all the learning and growth you've done this semester too. So with that, please join me in welcoming Catherine.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining me to my Westover Symposium. I'm really excited to see you all. If you've read the flyers, you may know that my name is Catherine and I'm the Westover person this year. Before I start my presentation and my paper, whatever you want to call it, I would like to share some of my Westover experience with you. So here are some photos that I took at my last day at Hillstead. So the weather was not that great that day, but the flowers were very pretty, and I brought some flowers to Melanie, the main curator, who was really helping me a lot during my internship, and the flowers are sponsored by Allie, kudos. And featuring my 2 selfies of before work and after work. Okay, so I'm gonna briefly describe what my job was at Hillstead. So basically, I helped transcribe some hours of conversations. If you have never transcribed before, good for you. It was really no fun, and I would never go through that again. But the conversation is between Hillstead main curator Melanie, Faith, and her daughter Bibi during a family reunion. And you may ask, Catherine, who Faith and her daughter Bibi are? I'm sorry. They are from the Brooks family, who are Theodate's relatives. And so they had that conversation during Brooks family reunion held at Hillstead. Both of them are Westover alums, and they talked a lot about their experience with Westover. For example, they talked about Dorcas, how they used to help out in the hospital, which is something that I'm familiar with, and how small Westover is, which is true for all those years. And they also talked about how Aunt Paulina, the former head of school at their time, saved their math, and how one of them actually started out as a math major at Princeton because of her. And Aunt Paulina wrote their pre-calc textbook, which is kind of impressive. So overall, these small kind of anecdote kind of just really made the transcription process a little bit more fun, because I've been a student at Westover for so long, and just that I thought I knew everything, but it's not really. There are so much more about Westover history that is still waiting to be learned, and so that just really intrigued me. And something else that I did was I helped to do some research on some Qing official headwear. So I was kind of just asking Melanie, the main curator, if she has any Chinese objects, Chinese painting, any sort of that could come into my sort of part of my paper. And so she found this huge box of Chinese paintings, and those are brought back by Theodate from her trip to China. They're just draft, and none of them are complete, but I think what Melanie mentioned was that Theodate really saw the potential within that specific artist, and that's why she brought all of those portraits and stuff back. And among all the portraits, I feel like I'm just really intrigued to Qing official headwear, so I helped out and to do some research so that maybe in the future, if they want to do an exhibition or anything like that, they can always include that as part of their thing. And for what I did in our school archives, so I spent like some weeks doing some all kind of like random research, digging through all the photo albums around like 19th centuries-ish, and I found some really exciting stuff, which is that our school actually had a show called the Browns Buddha. It's kind of similar to the shows that we have now. It's led by students, and they dressed in traditional Chinese clothing, and I was just impressed by how like I can kind of see the cultural influence, and I was just shocked by how good the costume looks. That was really impressive. And so yeah, that was part of my experience there. So now to a little bit why I did my project. I was reading Tears of Geniuses. If you are Samsi alum, you probably have read it. It's a book of Theodore Pope Riddle. So I kind of just read through that book, and I'm shocked by some of Theodore's nowadays racist comments, and it was really kind of like an uncomfortable section to read for that book. So I read through that, and I was just wondering what led to her comments. So at the end of the chapter, she included some photographs. The author included some photographs of Theodore on her trip to China, and one of them is like a very symmetrical photograph of Theodore and her husband, and along with some Chinese laborers, which I will show you in a minute. That just really intrigued me in some way, and something about it just really pulled me in, and that's kind of why I started to kind of explore this topic. And to my exhibition in the art gallery, I did this exhibition as a way to visualize my paper. So this exhibition invites you to explore the role of photography in cultural influence. The video projection features two photographs. The first depicts Western tourists, which includes Theodore and her husband and Chinese laborers in a symmetrical composition, while the second alters the image, making the laborers completely white to symbolize their flattened culture as a result of the photograph. The transition between these images mimics the process of taking the photograph, representing the transformation of the laborer's physical presence to a conflattened image. A mirror is placed in front of the projection, allowing you to see yourself within the context of these shifting perspectives, and also allowing you to watch how, through the viewing experience, you become complicit in cultural influence. So I invite you to take a look, if you haven't already. The exhibition is in the LBD Art Gallery, along with all other amazing community artworks. So go check them out after this. Do you have those? Let's go. Oh, it's okay. Silly my It's okay. Okay. And I'm going to stop my paper. This is going to be long. A convergence of difference, Western tourist photography and the shaping of cultural image in Theodore Pope's Chinese photo albums. A photograph of Theodore Pope Riddle and her husband John Riddle, taken around 1919 from their trip to China, captures a moment of them sitting in rickshaws. Dressed in fashionable Western clothes and hats, Theodore and her husband pose from what looks to be the surrounding forbidden city. They'd sit comfortably on the rickshaws, theodate, flashing a broad smile, while the coolies or the laborers who pulled the rickshaws, dressed in plain clothes, pose for a photograph with weary facial expressions as, quote, evidence of the trip having been made, end quote. The photograph is a testament to the way Susan Sontag describes the consumption of tourist photography as, quote, taking possession of space in which the traveler feels insecure, end quote, through the, quote, remarkable encounter, end quote. The encounter here of the tourist experience is described by Theodate in her travel diaries. Quote, we have had 2 days here, and wherever we go, we must be carried in chairs or go on foot. The chairs are made of bamboo with removable tops, and there are 2, 3, or 4 bearers, coolies, according to the weight of the person to be carried. As coolies preserved in both the photograph and the text become themselves part of the event, the remarkable encounter of the tourist experience becomes the convergence of Eastern and Western cultures demonstrated in the photograph through opposition. Leisurely tourists versus the working laborers, clothed versus half-clothed, sitting versus standing. As an accumulation of experiences then, everything that reinforces the contrast between the two cultures in this photograph is also seen in Theodate's photo albums. Theodate, a photographer herself, acquired 2 Chinese photo albums in her collection. Whether she authored these images or collected them on her travels is unknown, but the photographs document encounter that, while including some tourist attractions, local sites, an upper-class woman, largely document graves and working class, and child labor. As these images then collectively correspond to the way Theodate described Guangzhou, China, as dying in her letter to her mother Ada, the role of photography, and by extension, the xerograph in relation to Western tourism in the early 20th century shaped a negative image of local culture through the tourist encounter. As Theodate Pope's 1919 Peking photograph then, along with her Chinese photo albums, demonstrate the way foreign photography constructed Chinese cultural identity and certified the traveler's experience as image through xerographic effects. Theodate's China photographs demonstrate the way Western tourist photography shaped cultural attitudes of China through the spectacle of a convergence of difference. At the turn of the century, photography as a machine of mirroring reality not only became a form of pre-modern painting, but also became part of China's religious, literary, and commercial culture, which in turn affirmed photography as reflected truth. When the idea of photography was first introduced to China, the term 照相, which means reflecting a portrait with a mirror, became its designation as a result partly of the mirror each camera contained. With the notion of reflecting the portrait of reality, photography, as Yigu writes in the article, quote, helped establish a new understanding of the relation between painting and reality, end quote. Coloring became so popular that Shanghai Daily in 1876 introduced it as, quote, a standard step in photography, end quote. People would retouch their eyes and eyebrows to achieve the eyebrows and eyes are clear effect, which later became a common phrase for people when complimenting other people's good appearance. To Chinese people, techniques like combining coloring with photographs not only enhanced reality, but also enable photography to be assimilated into a new frame of reference. acknowledging the photographic medium as well as Chinese pre-modern painting. While coloring became an official procedure to enhance the reality effects of a photograph, photography itself became a mirror of culture. As Gu goes on to argue, the metaphor of the mirror was already important to both Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, and the mythology and folklore of pre-modern China. More specifically, while Confucianism uses the mirror metaphor mainly to, quote, emphasize the necessity for self-reflection, end quote, Buddhism uses the metaphor to, quote, accentuate the inseparability of epistemology and ontology, end quote, or the physical self from the spiritual self. As photography became a powerful metaphor for reflecting the spiritual self-portrait, in the realm of mythology and folklore, the mirror constantly served as an object that could, as Gu describes, quote, surpass human vision and faithfully reflect reality, end quote. For example, mirrors were commonly believed to reveal truth about oneself, meaning, for instance, whether someone was a demon in disguise. The alignment between photography and truth through the mirror metaphor can further be seen in an 1899 poem. In an 1899 poem in 100 Bamboo Rhymes on Shanghai, describing the photographic process of being photographed as in a wooden box is inserted around mirror. People sit in the yard away and face the mirror, end quote. The poem is also accompanied by an annotation that elaborates on the poet's experience with photography with an emphasis on the mirror. I sat down by the window for just a moment. In the mirror, my true form has already been transcribed, end quote. Transcribing one's true form, this confusion of photography's mirror effect as a metaphor for truth was furthered through its use in advertisements. Newspaper advertisements from the period for photographic portraits, for example, emphasized truth by adding the character Jin as an adjective to photographs. With the mirror metaphor of photography converging spiritual and empirical knowledge with visual knowledge, photography in its association with truth defined in the modern knowledge that stood between people and reality. With the cultural perception of photography in China as mirror to truth, collectible photo albums shaped Chinese national character for Western tourists, most especially through scenes of unskilled labor and violence. In Sarah Fraser's article, The Face of China, Photography's Role in Shaping Image, she argues that through photographs taken from the 1850s to the 1920s, quote, China became a popular object of spectatorship, end quote. In particular, she argues that photographs of, quote, violence and submission, end quote, that frequently appear in these photo albums demonstrated China's dependency on pre-modern technology through images of the unskilled laborer. For example, in the photograph taken in 1863 from an album by an anonymous photographer entitled The Far East, low-class unskilled laborers known as coolies, as the description of the photograph states, wait for employment. Wearing torn clothing and holding bamboo basket, they pose together for a photographer in two formal roles. Citing that these workers are, quote, highly artificial constructions that Saunders staged by posing subjects and giving them profession-specific props and clothing, end quote. Fraser notes how photographs like these, quote, denigrate Chinese workers, end quote, by showing them as, quote, unreliable, inept, and unskilled, end quote. They often appear in patched clothing, evidently torn and repaired, which, along with the filthy environment that they worked in, made them look identical to criminals from the perspective of Western viewers. As a result, as Fraser writes, quote, Chinese workers, military personnel, and criminals became conflated in the Western imaginary at the turn of the century, end quote. Besides the laborers, scenes of violence and submission at the turn of the century during the time of colonization and war were also popular among tourists. For example, photographs of beheading were taken, such as the photograph Beheading Peking, taken by an anonymous photographer in 1904. In this photograph, a Chinese man surrounded by the Japanese army kneels passively waiting for the beheading. The photograph then not only testifies to the violence of the event, but the Western viewer who consumes the image bears witness. If photography then, as Sontag describes, confers to an event a kind of immortality, and the photograph an act of non-intervention, these photo albums depicting scenes of submission and violence that grew in popularity among Western travelers became lasting records that shaped stereotypical views of Chinese culture. The consumption of such images of suffering rendered Western viewers complicit not only in that suffering but also in facilitating the process of typing the character of Chinese culture. As Fraser writes, quote, like the bystanders watching an execution, end quote, the Western viewer, quote, consumed a China constructed by its violent occupiers, end quote. Selective and artificially constructed foreign photography in its documentary effect legitimized a Chinese identity that was submissive, violent, and unskilled. The impact of tourist photo albums in shaping a Western perception of Chinese culture is reinforced and internalized through Theodore Pope's China photo albums and her letters to her mother. On her trip to Canton, China around 1919, Theodore collected 2 photo albums that reflect, quote, million inhabitants in the city and 120,000 who live on boats, end quote, as she describes in a letter to her mother. Here, the full picture of Chinese culture seems to be represented from famous tourist sites such as the Temple of Heaven to images of death and child labor. Which make up about a quarter of the photographs in Theodore's albums. In one photograph from album 680, for example, the Tower of Bones, Jiguta in Chinese, one carved wooden plaque indicating girls and other indicating boys, showcases how common death was for children at the time. While almost 42% of children who were born in 1850 in China did not make it to their 5th birthday, towers of bones like those in Theodore's photo album built to dispose of the dead, young bodies, reinforced a limited narrative of death and suffering. Similar to Theodore's album, such morbid images of Canton also appear in James Rickelton's albums. Known for taking photographs of his travels through China in 1900, James Rickelton, in his xerograph Dying in the Dying Field, captured a starved Cantonese man lying on the ground and staring at the viewer, his knowing gaze telling the viewer that his struggle will soon be over. Noting that the vacant location near the river as the dying place, Rickelton's caption for this photograph indicates this site as the place where, quote, poor, starving, miserable, outcasts, and homeless sick, homeless poor, homeless misery of every form come to die, end quote. that the remains of the dead are then, quote, borne to an unknown grave in the potter's field, end quote. Theoday's album provides the photographic documentation of Pottersfield and the sad narrative of death these albums legitimize. As these albums conveyed a narrative of suffering, even in the more uplifting subjects of gatherings, the Cantonese are captured with sorrowful expressions. As a result, the collective effect of these albums shapes a negative narrative of Chinese society as one of suffering. The narrative Theoday internalized when she wrote about her travel to her mother. Perceiving the land as so filthy that China could never be a menace, end quote. Theoday described how every one of her five senses were insulted, end quote. She goes on to describe, quote, babies with running sores, men with strange lumps on their necks or faces, everyone sneezing, coughing, spitting, scratching, bloody meat shops with diseased-looking carcasses of pigs and unknown cats that may be dogs, fresh vegetables that come from fields that are manured by human excrement. Girl babies murdered and often buried alive, and how some of the dead remain unburied for months and even years. End quote. Describing the Chinese as lazy, Theoday's description of disease, filth, suffering, and sloth affirm her cultural impressions of China, so captured in her photo albums. Bystanders to such conflated cultural narratives in their photographic and written accounts, Rickleton and Theoday alike demonstrate the power of these photographic albums as what Susan Sontag calls, quote, a way to certify experience, end quote. As photo albums, quote, convert experience into an image, a souvenir, end quote, Sontag writes how, quote, travel becomes a strategy for accumulating photographs, end quote, and assuage general feelings of disorientation, end quote, between the tourist and the encounter. As experience becomes an image or collectible souvenir, photo albums like those in Theoday's collection invite the experience of the image to be packaged and shared, and the tourists, such as Susan Sontag writes, to then, quote, take possession of space in which they are insecure, end quote. By focusing only on what's documented in the photo albums, the Western tourist experience of China becomes the image that shapes the typing of Chinese character. Enhancing the photographic tourist experience as the image was the way stereographs became a substitute for a sensory-rich experience. Invented from the principles of binocular vision around 1830s, stereographs offer viewers a mesmerizing three-dimensional experience of the images. By using the disparity between photographs seen by each eye, stereoscopes transformed flat photographs into immersive experiences where the convergence of optic axes brought things to life. With such functions, stereographs were introduced to China as a form of photography due to a growing curiosity about China during the decline of Qing dynasty in the latter half of the 19th century. The stereographic album with accompanying text, China Through the Stereoscope, Rickleton published in 1900, was one that represents the trend. While the stereographic photographs documented the same scenes of Chinese culture as the photo albums, the accompanying text in his book serves as a tour guide, providing viewers with an even more immersive experience of such images. Defining the stereograph as, quote, telling no lies, end quote, Rickleton explains to his reader or tourist that the stereoscope provide, quote, the most realistic ocular perception attainable in photographic art, end quote. By, quote, fixing all impressions, end quote, and by affirming the way stereoscope's effect is, quote, scarcely less than natural vision, end quote. Riggleton doesn't simply claim the accuracy and truth replicated in the stereograph, but sees its optical effects as a substitute for experience. Understanding that, quote, sight is the clever sense in the acquisition of knowledge, end quote, Riggleton's stereographic album confirms the truth of China, quote, to see is to know, end quote. The effect then of the stereoscope as truthful experience is defined further by Riggleton when he recognizes that, quote, in stereoscope we are dealing with realities, but they are realities of soul states, not the reality of outward physical things. He goes on to define soul states as, quote, realities of consciousness made up of thoughts, emotions, desires, end quote. Complemented by the, quote, realities of the physical world, end quote, Riggleton describes how physical reality are the means to mental reality, and that these experiences make up the, quote, genuine experience of travel, end quote. For Riggleton, sensory-rich captions and descriptions of such stereographic location complete the full sensory experience of the soul state and provide for that genuine experience. In his description of the dying field, for example, Riggleton writes that, quote, we are here in a vacant space near the river, a sort of common litter with refuse and scavenged by starving dogs, quote, end quote. He continues to describe the moment as he writes, quote, the pitiable specimen before us is near the end. Too near to heed the usually dreaded camera, I attempted to catch a view of others who, having a trifle more vitality left, crawled away with hands and knees. His glassy fixed gaze tells how soon his long, hard struggle will be over. This far-gone case of destitution and misery is not the only one in his last retreat of human agony. You see another in the distance, probably a new arrival, as he yet has strength to sit erect. Probably you do not care to tarry longer before the harrowing scene in the dying place. End quote. While providing descriptive context for the viewer's complete impression, Riggleton puts the viewers in the scene in a way that experience is heightened through first-person perspective and present tense. Adjectives that describe a first-hand experience like, quote, glassy fixed gaze, end quote, animate the scene with what's happening around it, complementing the physical effect of the stereograph with the sensory experience of each caption. Riggleton's, quote, genuine experience of travel, end quote, was achieved via his soul state of the stereoscopic effect. With a truth experience offered by travel photographers like Riggleton, the documentation not only shaped the Western viewer's impression of Chinese culture, but also inevitably impacted Chinese identity itself. Many photographers made photo albums with stereographs of Chinese to urge colonization. Riggleton unhesitatingly supported the United States overseas expansion as a privilege for less developed countries. As in his Dying in the Dying Field, when Riggleton claimed the image to be, quote, the darkest and the saddest, and we can find a brighter scene, end quote, he, along with the photograph, reinforces a contrived and biased truth of the country's need for salvation. By including the context of the stereographs accompanying him on his photographic journey, Rickleton invites the viewers to adopt his viewpoints by directly experiencing them. While Rickleton invites the opportunity to adopt viewpoints, Fraser argues that the stereoscope especially enhanced that adoption of viewpoint by, quote, shaping local self-image, end quote. This impact of photography on Chinese identity is represented in Cantonese Jasmine Morning for the Emperor, their first peep into the stereoscope. In this stereograph, 3 men seated at the center and dressed formally. The man in the center is holding a stereoscope while the 2 men beside him are observing him. A Cantonese man looking at a china constructed by Western photographers demonstrates how a biased cultural identity perceived by foreigners can be, as Fraser writes, recycled back to a Chinese viewership, end quote. Fraser claims that these photographs are only the perspective of Western photographers, who chose their subjects and were inevitably biased by having preconceptions. However, the popularity of foreign photography with subjects like Chinese laborers and scenes of violence and submission was brought to life through stereotypes in realistic 3-dimensional form. The printing and selling of these photo albums not only propagated a constructed Chinese identity for tourists, but also through the enhanced truth experience of the stereograph, reinforced those biased views for the Chinese citizen. It was not only the adoption of bias by Western tourists who certified the experience by image and by extension as truth, but also that Chinese people's perceptions of themselves through photographs that led to the influence of local culture. As the stereograph enhanced and shaped a biased image of local culture recycled back to the Chinese people, the stereograph as a medium reinforces the viewing experience that becomes the standardized reality of China. In his work, Techniques of the Observer, art theorist Jonathan Crary argues that the stereograph at the turn of the century gave viewers not only a new autonomy in seeing, but also a way to control and standardize vision. Calling the stereograph the, quote, most significant form of visual imagery in the 19th century with the exception of the photograph, end quote. Crary defines stereographs as a process of unity through disparity, or, quote, an operation of reconciling differences, of making 2 distinct views appear as one, end quote. Uniting optic axes on similar points of 2 pictures in succession, the realism of stereographs, according to Crary, quote, presupposes perceptual experience to be an apprehension of differences, end quote. Therefore, what reinforces the reality effects of the stereograph is not the stereograph itself, per se, but rather the conjunction of perceptual differences based on 2 distinct images. Thus, that reality effect of the conjunction, what Rickleton called the soul state of the photograph, is enhanced as a result of the disparity of perception, so that the, quote, effect of the observer's experience of the differential between 2 other images, end quote, becomes a kind of standard, a truth. As experience becomes an image, that truth is based on differences that allow for bias, which was reinforced by visual experience. The convergence of difference, then, in the stereograph isn't just optical. Rather, the optical reality has become a cultural truth. The intersection of the apprehension of differences makes the experience amplified and therefore enhances the Orientalist view of the tour. What the experience of the stereograph produced repeatedly, then, Crary claims, was, quote, effortless transformation of the dreary parallel images of flat stereocards into tantalizing apparition of death, end quote. As a result, the The conflatant stereotype takes on the illusion of cultural reality. Theater's picking photograph then depicted itself on cultural differences, creates its own stereoscopic effect. The image of Chinese laborers standing at the center of the composition with their Western tourists creates a mirror effect that not only draws culturally on the concept of the photograph as a mirror of Rickleton's, quote, truth form transcribed, end quote, but also on a subtlety of difference that enhances the, quote, apparition of depth, end quote. The photograph effect stereoscopic looking. As such, along with Theater's letter to her mother, the viewer affirms not only the biases of Rickleton's album, but also the photograph. The intersection of photography, culture, and stereotypes through the viewing experience has made the illusion of culture based on the convergence of difference.
Today to different places, and they want to record it without injecting their own biases. Have you thought through anything of how they can achieve that? Like, is there a way to do travel photography without making it, flattening that reality?
I feel like, from my perspective, it's kind of inevitable in a way that as we are photographing, like it's just the nature of photography that everything that you capture stay in that moment, and whatever that you want to say more about the photograph that you take, that you may include a paragraph about, oh, I take this photograph, and you may explain to your friends that this is really what happened and that's the culture, and you never know if the photograph would be taken out of the context, and you would never. There's kind of no way, in my perspective, to prevent that from happening. Yeah, because that's just the nature of photography.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tom?
Yeah. I loved your essay, by the way. I think it was really great. But I wish you could talk a little more about how you came up with the idea for the art exhibit, because it's such a kind of brilliant use of the mirror. So what kind of, what was the thinking that kind of led you to that?
So for the exhibition, I had those kind of ideas just about stereographs, about photography, about the process of taking a photo, about travel, about the mirror effect, and I was just thinking about what's the way to kind of combine them. And I feel like my exhibition kind of incorporate that traveling experience by just having that photograph of Theodore and her husband, and also kind of that process of being photographed and that conflated, like flattened culture by having the transition between those two photographs of kind of like like kind of similar to a photo, like taking a photo moment, and also by placing a mirror in front of it. It's first of all, it facilitates you to see yourself there along with all the laborers and like using the photograph, but also kind of, as I mentioned in my paper, the mirror effect, like the mirror reflects what's true about the reality in Chinese culture, and so that through the mirror that's included in my exhibition, you can see that what's the reality of being photographed. Huh, Kayla.
Great job. I had wondered, I don't know why this is only occurring to me now, between the exhibit piece, the work that you've done here, your AP work, which if you haven't already seen it in the dining hall, it's really great, you should go check it out. And then work that you've done previously. There's such obvious connections between how you handle the past. You're doing it through your work in AP, your connection with Chinese drawing, traditional drawing. You did a project using the archives of Westover photography last year, and you handle it in such a similar way in here. And I wonder, during the process of your analysis of this work, if you had stumbled upon any connections in the artwork that you yourself make.
Well, when I first saw this photograph, I was intrigued by how symmetrical it looks, and I guess from what I did, it just feels like whenever I'm intrigued by some kind of artwork, in some ways they all inspire me to do some of like classwork for your class, or some creative work. And this photograph is just, it's symmetrical in a way that I want to cut all those figures out and to make it into something, make the background something different, and to make it with a colorful background or something like that. It was just so many creative stuff that I was thinking about. But then I came to realize that I feel like the background is important for just the context of this symposium, or my project, because it's part of Chinese culture, it's Chinese architecture, and it them being in that kind of cultural context provides a more of a explanation, or a visual experience for the viewers to understand my paper. So, but I am thinking about something something creative like this. Okay. So since there's no more questions right now, I'm gonna have some final thank yous. She's not here today, but I wanna thank Melanie for helping me out, giving me all the guidance and help during my internship. And I wanna thank Alyssa and Dave for driving me all the time, even though sometimes I show up late. I want to thank Nancy, Rich, and Muffy for helping me out in the school archives. Oh, no. Okay. I want to thank Caleb for helping me out for the exhibition and throughout my years at Westover. Making the link for my mom and everyone to watch all the way from China, and thank you all so much. I want to say thank you to all of the Samsi alums who came today, and thank you for all your time. all the time, and yeah. And yeah. I don't know. I'll give them to I'll give them later. And I want to thank, like, final, like, big shout out to Ali for making all this possible. Like, you've done so much work. I feel like sometimes even more than me. Thank you for helping me out all the time, helping with my paper, my exhibition, my everything, and just thank you. No, thank you.
So I am so pleased to congratulate Catherine on completing her SANSI internship with her certificate and the stipend that she